Thanks for listening to Talk Radio 1210 WPHT On Demand.
Just a few notes. I was a guest speaker this past Thursday at a function held in Narberth, PA, called Republicans for Hope, organized by none other than Hope Danoff. Wow, so many Republicans running for seats in Pennsylvania area attended. It was a terrific night. People from all walks of life speaking up for the love of this country and wanting to contribute. How refreshing to be part of. Also, this is a busy week for Barry Sable and Friends. Wednesday night, June 26th. This week, 5 to 6, I will be hosting an hour show on WVLT, Cruising 92.1 with Steve DiOrio. Back to Violence Station on my birthday, June 29th, to WVLT, Saturday morning from 9 to 11. Peter, you and I will be sitting in for Steve DiOrio as the Steve DiOrio Show for 2 solid hours, and then back in studio at our home station for Sunday morning, as always, doing the Barry Sable Show with Friends right here at 24th and Market. So, Peter, we are going to be busy this week. Again, looks like less golf on the links and more time on the mic. Having said that, very informative show today, Peter. 2 special guests, former Dan Cuellar of Action 6 News and past Congressman of PA, Curtis Weldon. Boys, let's go. Any thoughts before I introduce Dan,
just welcome
Peter?
to the show. It's good to see these guys. I had an opportunity to meet these gentlemen at the Showers of Hope charity as a guest of Steve's, and it was a very impressive ceremony. It's a great charity, and you got two great guests there.
Yeah. So let's start right away. We have limited time, guys, only an hour. Journalist Dan Cuellar has worked in a variety of roles as a news and weather reporter, editor, cameraman, and anchor, including a radio career spanning over 48 years. In 1988, Dan joined WPVI 6 ABC Action News team and became known for his constant and skillful reporting on the biggest news stories, both domestic and internationally, for more than 3 decades around the globe. Short in stature, but also never at a loss for words. Dan, welcome this morning to the Barry Sable Show with Friends. I don't do it quite like you did, but I'm trying. I'm a rookie.
Well, Barry, thank you very much. You're so kind to have us here this morning. I'm very honored to be on your show for the first time in person, you and Peter, and I'm looking forward to a great show this morning. We're going to have fun.
Yeah, we are going to have fun. So tell us, last night you had an opportunity to attend the Trump rally at LaCour Center. Tell us your thoughts on that night.
It was a wonderful event. There were about 15 to 20,000 people in the audience, and I must say, of all backgrounds, of all reaches, of all whether we had a lot of members of the African American community, we had a lot of members of other communities as well there, which was impressive to me.
Yes,
because as you know, this is a deep blue city. I mean, this is President Biden's best stop. He stops here like it seems almost every week or every other week. And for Trump to have come into this deep blue city like Philadelphia and have an impressive audience of 15 to 20,000 people there at the LaCour Center, I mean, I was amazed. I said, wow. I mean, that's a lot of people to come out here and from all backgrounds.
Yeah.
I said, oh, well, there's going to be a lot of – this was my first Trump rally as a supporter. I covered him when I was a journalist for Action News. But I was really left in awe of the people, mostly, the people who were there. I said, wow, he had a rapper there that he had gone to a steakhouse. He had gone to a cheesecake to get cheesecakes with this rapper. I said, and he was wearing a MAGA hat. And I said, wow. And then I saw these working people who work for a living, and some of them having 2 jobs to survive with what's going on with our economy. And they're in the audience supporting President Donald J. Trump. That was impressive to me. That's what I left with when I left that rally last night.
Kurt, sitting to your left of Dan, I want to obviously include you, but we're going to get to you at 10:30. Do you see the worm turning in the state of Pennsylvania, or do you think we cannot turn this blue state red?
I see the worm turning all over the country, and I've seen that in the past with different candidates. But it's not about the momentum. It's about organizing for Election Day, and actually knowing how to get the vote out and preventing fraud. Fraud was prevalent in the last election. I don't care what people say. I'm a politician.
I agree with you.
I was county councilman, mayor, and Congress for 20 years, and I understand fraud. And if we don't deal with that and make sure that the people who vote are properly registered, are citizens, then it doesn't matter what you do. They will find a way to dump enough votes in, even using illegal aliens, heaven forbid, to change the system. Now, I'm an optimist, but I'll tell you, I've seen the inner side of our government, and it's not pretty. And I've become kind of concerned with both parties and the leadership in both parties, because they tend to too much cater to those people who are not elected, who are driven by power and money. And those people have affected both parties. And that's why Trump was so much opposed last time, because he threatened that power base. And I've known Joe Biden my whole life. He's not from Pennsylvania. He was born here, but he grew up in Claymont, Delaware. Yeah. A mile from me. I grew up in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania. So we were a mile apart. My kids went to school with Joe's kids. My son, Kurt, was Ashley's classmate. So I've known Joe for 35, 40 years. And I understand, and supported him in many of my foreign policy initiatives. Joe came with me. He went with me to Libya to meet Gaddafi. He went with me to Iraq. But it's not the same Joe Biden today. No, but again, what bothers me, it's not just about the leaders. It's about the forces driving the system in our country. And that's what the American people need to understand. It's not just the people running. It's what's behind them. And that's very problematic. And I took it on, and I paid the price for that.
No, I understand that. So, Dan, I want to get back to you. Nationally, 9/11 attacks, the Columbine massacre, Waco siege, and Oklahoma bombing. Tell us some stories. Listen, let me be honest with you. To me, you're a highlight reel. So the mic is yours. Give me and give our listeners what over the years really affected you in every which way.
Well, if you want to start with 9/11, even before 9/11, we had seen the attack on the World Trade Center back in the early 90s, as Kirk will remember, when they tried to bring down those towers with
93.
bombs in the garage in 1993. And I was rushed there to go cover that event. And I said, wow, man, there were some people that were injured during that attack, right, Kurt, as you'll recall?
Yep, a couple of deaths.
A couple of deaths. And then I said, since that time, I was left with this impression that we have to be mindful of people that are trying to attack us, even people that we have defended and fought for their freedom.
Yes.
I mean, we have lost lives to defend other civilizations in other countries, in particular in the Middle East.
Yep.
And then these same people are coming back to try to destroy us. And sure enough, here we are under this rubble and seeing these once beautiful towers in shambles. Towers, by the way, that me and my family had visited over the years because they were impressive buildings, the Twin Towers. And then to come back and see them like that, and destruction and smoke. And Kurt, you'll recall when we went on the train on that Friday, that very week after the attacks, because Kurt was trying to get me into the actual site because he was with the caucus, the Congressional Caucus for Firefighters. And he got me as close to the gate, and I was as close as I was able to get. But that was all I needed to see. I didn't need to go into the actual site to realize how devastating this event was for America. It was devastating.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was absolutely devastating.
Go ahead, Peter.
And
I know you're chomping at the bit.
You could smell death.
Yep.
You could actually smell death.
Yep. Peter, your thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to change up a little bit and talk to Dan about why I think that, or at least from my perspective, why we really enjoyed your time as a reporter for ABC Action News. You were always a who, what, where, when guy. And that's, to me, is the basis of journalism. If you want to give opinions, go to the editorial page. You were an investigative reporter. You gave the news as it was, and then people could make their own assumptions or whatever. But at least they knew what happened, where it happened, when it happened, how it happened. And I really appreciate that kind of reporting. I thought it was great. And I think, for me, I think that that's what brought a lot of people to say, hey, let's check this guy out and see what he's got to say.
Well, thank you, Peter. There are basic things that I feel that we as journalists have to do in television. It's important that we stay unbiased. And, I say that knowing that there are so many biased people in the mainstream media right now, especially with their views, mostly liberal views, and so that comes across. Even when you're not cognizant of it, it comes across in the way you're reporting. And to me, I always felt that you had to stay right in the middle and let the audience decide which position to take. My job was to present the facts, the basics, and let the public, let the audience decide which is right, which is wrong, what do they believe. But my job is to deliver the facts.
Yeah, and
that's what I tried to do for the better part of my career in Philadelphia and beyond, in San Antonio and Houston.
Right.
Yeah, did a great job with that.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.
There's the music playing. Are we up against the break? Because I wanted Mr. Weldon to jump in. Guys, it looks like we're up against the break. You have been listening to the Barry Sable Show with friends in studio with me, Dan Quelliar, and Kurt Weldon, and Peter Mimo. We will see you on the other side.
This is Talk Radio 1210, WPHT On Demand. On Demand.
So when I called Dan to say I would like to have him and you on the show, separately, Dan says to me, you can't have Kurt Weldon on the show without me. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I know where all the dead bodies lay, and I've been, reporting on this guy and friendly with this guy forever. You just can't have him. I said, hold on. And I started to just tell him I've done a little bit of homework on you, and I started to ramp up and say, this is what Kurt did here, and this is what... He said, wait a second, you've done your homework? Of course I've done my homework. So what I'm going to do now is turn to you and ask your buddy what you want to know from him. The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, it's great to be on your show, and you both do a great service for not just the region, but for the country, and I applaud you both for that.
Thank you, Kurt.
Ongoing activity, and your interviews really do have significant meaning, and they are important. So don't ever underestimate their power and the power of the influence you have. I met Dan when I was rising up. I'm a teacher by profession, taught in Darby, and was a volunteer firefighter my whole life. And I met Dan when I got involved as the mayor and county councilman, and then went to Congress. And the one thing about Dan, I could read media people, and there are some people in the media who depend on deliberate releases from people that want to remain anonymous. Usually they have an agenda, and that's what's happening nationally. Our agencies will leak stories out that really are not true, but they use that to develop an agenda that they want politically to move forward. And the reporter doesn't have to basically carry that. Dan didn't do that. Dan was an honest reporter. He would take on a challenge. And if you did something wrong or embarrassing, he would say, hey, what's your story about this? Yep. And Dan was that kind of a person. And so when I gave Dan the test, and Dan, tell him what you thought when I invited you to, go down to Homestead, Florida, 2 days after Hurricane Andrew came through, and you slept in a tent, or when you went to Katrina in New Orleans the day after, and you waded through water, or you went to Kuwait, and you were on board the Amir's plane, and you got in to see sites that no other reporter in the world got into. Tell them what your feelings were as a reporter with those experiences you had, or the Trade Center, both at 9/11 and the other times you went up there to visit.
Great job, Mr. Well. Hold on. Great job, Mr. Weldon. Peter, you and I might as well grab our putters. We could go in the hallway for a while.
They're sitting in for us next week.
Huh?
They're sitting in for us next week.
Exactly. Go ahead.
All those events, Kurt, are uniquely different, and yet they're united by a common thread. And that is that our military was involved in helping people facing devastation, as they were in Homestead, Florida, delivering much-needed supplies like water, basic things that we take for granted, but they didn't have any of that because they had just been demolished by this devastating hurricane that a lot of people underestimated what it was going to do. Then you're talking about Katrina, another devastating hurricane that, again, I think some people underestimated and stayed home despite the fact they were being warned to leave the area. And then we had that levee break, and then you had all that water, and everybody's underwater. And again, our military is there again. And then you talk about Kuwait, when our American men and women went in there to liberate Kuwait. Remember what that was all about, to liberate Kuwait, this tiny little nation. And you invited me, you asked the ambassador, the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, if we could come along, me and my photographer. And so we were the only press people invited to go on this plane from Washington. We left from Dulles, as I recall, and flew right into this devastating airport. I don't know how the plane managed to land because there were potholes in the runways and planes that had been destroyed and demolished. And yet this plane managed to land, and we got there, and it was just, Kurt, you'll remember as I did, we saw a lot of terrible things, people that had been tortured, the instruments of torture, how they were tortured. And a lot of people don't see this stuff, but we saw it, and we reported it. We let our audience know this is what we're seeing, and this is what actually happened. And I can't say enough about it. I mean, it was I could go on and on and on. What's that?
When Dan went to Kuwait with me, and again, I would invite him to all these experiences because I wanted that local flavor there. He was going not as a reporter, but as a part of our delegation. And what I didn't tell him in advance going over was that the delegation was staying, these are all CEOs of big corporations, in a 5-star hotel in Bahrain, and then flying in each morning to Kuwait because there were no hotels open. The country was still, basically had Iraqis were still in Kuwait. But the message around the world was that our troops went over there only to bail out wealthy Arab sheiks. And I wanted the media to get directly to the people. So what I did on the way in to Bahrain the first time, I told the ambassador on the plane, we're not coming out. Dan didn't know this, but we stayed in Kuwait City that first night while the other CEOs all went back to Bahrain. We kicked open the doors of the rooms in the Kuwait Hilton. Wow. They gave us bottles of water, and I had Dan Cuellar do town meetings called Diwaniyas, where he interviewed the people of Kuwait directly. No State Department, no Foreign Service from Kuwait directly. And that was the story around the world about what really happened in Kuwait. And that was the kind of experience that Dan did that was so important in driving the proper thing and why we were in Kuwait and what it meant, not just for the people there, but for the people around the world. We defeated Saddam in what he was trying to do. And Dan told that story firsthand.
Well, Dan, let me say this much.
What's that?
You were right, okay? And you and I labeled it this week, Laurel and Hardy. That's who you two guys are. I can't bring one on without the other. And it's a real treat for Peter and I just to sit in awe. And I'm sure our listeners, hold on one second, Peter, are feeling the same way. You guys are a treat. I guess my question would be, and probably an unfair question, was there stories? I know we're going to get to Mr. Weldon in a minute. Were there stories that you saw that, call it the higher echelons, did not want you to report on?
Well, here's one. I'll tell you one. The guy who actually hired me at WPBI, Ned Warwick, was trapped in Kuwait. Wow. He was the producer. He was the managing editor of the ABC operations in Kuwait. Mm-hmm. And the hotel was bombed out. There was no electricity. They were operating on generators and bottled water and snacks that they had because they couldn't get in or out. And he pleaded with me, Dan, is there any way you can get me out of here because we can't, there's no way to get out of here. And I said, Kurt, is there any way we can get him on the flight out of Kuwait when we leave? And so I'm having to bail out my former boss out of Kuwait where he could not get otherwise. And so that's an untold story that has never been told. I've never shared that with anyone, but that actually happened.
Kurt, you're up to bat again. Go ahead. It's your buddy.
You know, it was interesting because we took with us, when we went over to Kuwait, I didn't want it to be a bunch of CEOs. So I actually invited the head of the building trades from Philadelphia. At the time, it was Pat Gillespie. I called Pat. I said, Pat, you want to go to Kuwait? He said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm going to Kuwait on the Freedom Flight because I was chairman of the Kuwaiti Task Force. I'm taking 11 members of Congress on the Emir's plane. I'm taking a film crew from Channel 6, and I want you to come representing the working people of our country. They're going to help rebuild Kuwait. So Pat Gillespie came on that flight with us, but Pat stayed back in Bahrain. He wouldn't stay overnight with us in Kuwait. And it was a very risky situation.
Yeah, it was.
Because there were Iraqi soldiers all around. There was no power.
There's no power.
I mean, and there we were,
and we're in the desert. Remember that.
We're doing town meetings with people we had never met. They're called Diwaniyas, but it was there to tell the truth. It was not to be manipulated by American State Department or by the Kuwait Foreign Ministry. It was there to get the message directly. And that's what I saw my job the entire time in Congress, not to be spun by people in the intelligence agency that always spun the media. And that's what they do so well. Even today they're doing. And Dan, you can verify that. Am I right or wrong?
That's absolutely correct.
Kurt, with your experience in Iraq and how it all started in 91, I guess that was, Operation Iraqi Freedom, I guess it was. Do you think President Bush handled that correctly by leaving Saddam Hussein boxed in? Or do you think he should have done more? Because, a lot of the problems that we're having now in the Middle East, kind of bubbled. That was the beginning of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we probably should have removed Saddam from his position. And I think the team we sent over there, Paul Bremer, and I met with him. I went over to Iraq 4 times. In fact, I took Biden on my second trip to Iraq. He went with me as a senator, believe it now. He also went with me to Libya. When I met with Gaddafi on the second trip, I called Joe after I came back. He said, I saw you did a great job. I want to go with you. I took Joe Biden to Libya to meet Gaddafi when I spoke to the whole country. But I think we could have, in most of our foreign policy experiences, we failed. I have a book that I've not published yet. The manuscript's done. And when I decide to publish it, if I do, it's going to shake the country because it goes through 13 different problems we have today. And it outlines in detail bipartisan efforts of the Congress, not Republican, bipartisan, that could have allowed us to solve those problems. In 5 cases, we did. In the other 8 cases, the administration and the people behind the administration, both sides, and I'm talking about the deep state, they didn't want that. And as a result, more Americans died. Mm-hmm. More innocent soldiers were killed. And to me, that was the ultimate. I'm the youngest of 9 kids. My 8 brothers and sisters all served in the military. My sisters were married to veterans. My job was to keep soldiers from being sent to places where they would be killed. And unfortunately, in Washington, there are some who consider them assets that we can lose. Yeah. You can have acceptable losses. Yeah, there are no acceptable losses. Yeah, we should never have the feeling that an American soldier is that we can accept to have that person die.
Listen, at this show, we agree with you 100%. And we often mention what happened in Afghanistan and the withdrawal. And we won't forget the guys that were killed there, and there was no reason for them to be killed there.
Dan, we're going to be up against the break in a minute. I want to give you an opportunity for the next minute and a half. Give us any story that you want, any story that makes sense.
Well, I have a lot of stories, and a minute and a half, I could never do it in a minute and a half, but I will say this. The United States flag represents the blood of a lot of American soldiers who risked their lives for us to be able to do what we're doing right now and sit here in freedom and be able to speak freely and speak of our opinions, whatever they might be. They died so we could have this freedom. And that flag to me represents something very powerful when you look at it that way and realize what it represents. Millions of our soldiers died so that we could be here today.
Well, like Kurt said, there's a lot of people in politics that think people are dispensable. And that bothers me. I just want to leave you with this thought. Not that you're going anywhere, because it's our turn to get to Mr. Weldon. This is what you said. I've had a tremendous run here at Action News. I really have. Together with my colleagues, we traveled the world reporting on major events of our times, like being there to witness the bravery of our troops and battlefields of Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Bosnia. I look at you as an inspiration to young people. I look at you, and we've had conversations all this week, that you are a model and a role model of what the youth of today should look to. You, and we're going to get to Mr. Welder, and we're going to get to him next. But to me, I said to you, I would like for you to come back on the show and just really talk about how you got involved in the media and all the other things, interviews. Did you have somebody represented? Did you have an agent? I want to talk to you personally. Phil, are we up against the break? I'm sorry, guys. We are up against the break. You have been listening to the Barry Sable Show with friends. We will see you on the other side. Please don't leave. These guys are too interesting. Don't you go get that cup of coffee, breakfast at a golf course. Give us another half hour. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Talk Radio 1210 WPHT On Demand.
Wayne Curtis Weldon is an American educator and politician. He served as a Republican member of the United States House of Representatives from the years of 1987 to 2007, representing the 7th District of Pennsylvania. His wife of 53 years, Mary, says she is ready to sign another contract for another 50 years. Some lady you have over there, sir. Weldon was Vice Chief of Armed Services, Committee and House Homeland Security Committee as well. He was also the co-chair of the Duma Congress Study Group and a top official cementing the relationship between the United States and Russia, and his list of duties of service to this country goes on and on and on. Wow. My God, Kurt, I ask you, other than president, what job for America have you not served for this country?
I just did what any normal person with common sense would do. I went to Washington to oversee our government, to use my instincts, the training I'd received at Westchester, my teacher training at Cheney University, which is the oldest historically minority school in the country, which I got my teacher certification from, and to ask the questions as the vice chairman of the committee overseeing our military, who had access to anything I wanted to see. And what I saw was bad. I saw decisions made taking American lives unnecessarily. I saw decisions at 9/11 that could have been prevented, and that book will come out. And you know, the 9/11 story, that's not me saying it.
When?
Well, I was told not to publish the book in 2005 because I'd come out with my book taking on the CIA. And the other book called Able Danger was published, and my lawyer said, if you publish that, they'll kill you. We knew about Muhammad Atta and the New York cell of al-Qaeda. I have the charts. They're here in my office with me, which I gave to the White House the day of 9/11. The agency did not want to take the Army's intelligence. Army intelligence under Command General Hugh Shelton, the chief of the General Staff, had a specialized program that identified them, and they were prohibited from transferring that information 3 times to the FBI. Louis Freeh, FBI director, went on national television on Good Morning America when I came out with my book. And Louis Freeh said, if I would have had the information that Congressman Weldon has now made available, we could have prevented 9/11 from occurring. And Louis Freeh wrote a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, the same thing. That's why they had to prevent me from chairing the Armed Services Committee. I was next in line. They knew what I would have held hearings on. They knew I had unlimited subpoena power. Wow. So the only way to stop it was to prevent the election. And they denied the people of Pennsylvania representation because of their fear of the truth. And that's really outrageous.
And to this day,
right.
He has never been charged with a crime. That was before we even knew what the deep state was. He was already a victim of the deep state. We've only learned about the deep state after we've seen what they've done to Donald J. Trump. But before that, I mean, the deep state was heavily at work in making sure this guy, who was a real threat to them, the people at the CIA and these agencies, didn't want him because they knew he was going to let this out about what they knew about 9/11 before it happened and the intelligence. And during that time, the government set up a wall so that this agency couldn't talk to this agency and so on and so on and so on. And so everybody had pieces of the puzzle, but they weren't able to share it. That was when George Bush put down that wall, as I remember, after 9/11, so that all the agencies could then share this information, knowledge that they had, that could have saved thousands of lives, not to mention our military who went overseas looking for Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Now, what's interesting, Dan? Hold on, Pete.
Sure.
You know what's interesting? I'm looking at Peter, and Peter's looking at me, and obviously we're on audio, not video, and we're both shaking our heads and saying, you got to be kidding. Even though Peter is well-versed in politics and has spent a lot of time listening to the Pragers and the Gorkas and the Levins, and he knows, but he's shaking his head and saying, wow, when does it ever stop? I mean, we look at things today. Peter, we talked about the 51 for FBI agents that wrote off on that laptop.
Intelligence.
The intelligence, not FBI. Intelligence, yes. And they signed off on the laptop somehow, some way. You could explain that better than what I just did.
We have a saying here at the show that Washington will never fix Washington. No matter how many great Republicans and patriots and conservatives we send up there, we always seem to hit a wall.
Yep.
And this is kind of what we're talking about once you get to Washington. And why is it important? Because we're working on the next 9/11. And if it happened once, if we don't get this information out, we're setting ourselves up for number 2.
You know, we're directly heading that way now. And it's unfortunate because there are good people that work in Washington, but they don't understand. This is not about nitpicking each other and backbiting and talking about issues that don't matter. This is about our national security. And if you're unafraid, if you're afraid to take on the deep state, if you're afraid to challenge the agencies, then you don't belong in Washington. They work for us. And if they can get away with manipulating data, manipulating stories, so that false narrative comes out to the people, then we have no one to blame but ourselves.
Now, Kurt, you mentioned leaks earlier, and I want to bring Dan in on this because it's really important. Quite recently, New York Times, Washington Post have some articles in there about Judge Aileen Cannon down in Miami about, well, she was told by other judges she should step aside, and, well, only a judge could have leaked that. What responsibility does the press have to sort through these leaks? Because we know from the Steele dossier, it was all fake. Does the press ever have a responsibility to say, no, I can't report these leaks anymore because every time you tell me something, it's not true?
Yep.
The press definitely has a responsibility. We all know that. That's a basic job. But we also know that a lot of them have agendas. A lot of them are liberals who support the liberal agenda and want it to succeed. And that's why they turn a blind eye to things like that. When they know that it's false, they know that disinformation is ludicrous, and yet they're out there spreading the word because that's the Bible that they believe in. That's the Bible that they worship, which is the liberal agenda.
Yeah, that's
and so that should tell you everything you need to know about why things like these get buried under the rug when they know. Well, look what happened with that Russian hoax. For how many? We spent $30+ million on something we knew wasn't true. That Russia, that they were colluding with Russia to win the election. That was a narrative that was spread by Hillary Clinton, as we all know now. Sure. And she had to pay a fine, by the way, because she was caught trying to call it a legal expense. Pretty much what happened to Trump when he called it a legal expense, except she never went to jail. She never was prosecuted. And yet she's the one that spread this Russian hoax narrative to begin with the Steele dossier.
Hey,
she funded that dossier.
That brings me to my next question, and a very important question. For my entire life, I always felt the FBI was the preeminent law enforcement agency in the world. And recently, I'd say over the last 10 years, boy, I've lost 100% confidence after reading the Durham report, reading some of the depositions, the under oath depositions from the FBI agents. These people were actively working against the President of the United States. What has happened to the FBI, and how do we get out of it?
Well, and I don't disagree with you. There are good people that work in the agencies, both FBI, CIA, and all the other intelligence agencies. In fact, my office is in D.C. with 3 federal judges, and one of them is Louis Freeh. So I don't, but I also have seen the dark side. As Dan mentioned, now listen to me, 3 weeks before my last election, my daughter's home in Philadelphia was raided at 7 o'clock in the morning. Raided by agents sent from Washington by the same lawyer who cut the plea bargain for Sandy Berger when he stole the documents. My daughter was never talked to by anyone. No one. Ever. It was just to create the perception that maybe she or maybe I had done something wrong. And then 3 months later, George Bush, the father, does a tribute to me, which you have a copy of, in front of 2,000 national leaders, saying that I'm the type of leader that America needs. That's what's wrong with the country. We cannot allow our leaders to take the easy path. It's not easy taking on the system. It's not easy having your family disrupted. My daughter's life was ruined, and she did nothing. They never talked to her.
Yeah.
I told this story to Seymour Hersh at the request of Dennis Kucinich, one of the most liberal Democrat members of the House, but a big supporter of mine. I said, Dennis, I don't want a story right now. He said, please meet with Cy. I met with him 4 years ago. I told him what I know. He said to me, Congressman, you have one hell of a story, but I can't take your word. I said, I'm not asking you to take my word, and you have no permission to publish it. We met 4 months later, just he and I. He said, I have verified every fact and detail you gave me. It was the intelligence community leadership that wanted you out. They went to Mueller and asked Mueller to do a favor and disrupt your election. That's not America. That's not what this country's about.
But it is what's going on today.
Yeah, that's right, and it's wrong.
Dan, what responsibility does the press have to resist on this? I haven't heard any journalists speak out about the Pulitzer Prizes that Maggie Haberman got for reporting lies. I mean, that's silly. Doesn't it sully the entire industry? Doesn't the profession?
It does, but most people aren't paying attention. They're not seeing what's going on, and they're being misled because they only watch that one station or the one news outlet, and they get all their news and information from that outlet. And they don't step aside every once in a while and say, maybe there's another point of view that we should be looking at and watching maybe Fox or Newsmax and seeing, is there another side of this story? And so as a result, most of the people go along with what's going on thinking, well, it's the FBI. We trust the FBI, and whatever the FBI says, it must be true. As the old saying goes, when the feds get you, that's it. You're done, and you're done. And that's the belief that Americans have.
It just pushes us further.
It must be true if the feds got you.
Dan, 1 minute left in this session. Quick question. We call it rapid fire. What do you have for Kurt? 1 minute we have. Less. Go ahead.
Kurt, what is your next step? I know you're big with he's a lifelong firefighter devoted to the firefighter cause. You're trying to honor these men and women who are devoted to our country and saving lives. What's your next initiative?
Well, we're empowering the 25 million first responders worldwide. You're a part of that. That's the meeting coming up on Tuesday. That's my top priority. It's a nonprofit. The second is I have 2 manuscripts I've published. I've I've done, but I've not printed them yet. I think it'll be my last act because when I print them, they'll kill me. One is about 9/11, and I gave a copy of that to the fire chief of New York 2 weeks ago. I said, here's a manuscript dedicated to Ray Downey, my good friend who was chief, who was killed at 9/11, and he should not have been killed. And the second is the book about the foreign policy, which will document the 13 cases of the scandals that have not been brought to the American people.
Guys, it looks like we're up against the break. We're coming back to you, Kurt, with that thought. You have been listening to the Barry Sable Show with Friends, Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. We've got 12 minutes left after the break. Don't leave us.
This is Talk Radio 1210 WPHT On Demand. On Demand.
You know, Peter and I always talk about, will Washington ever let Donald Trump become president? Me, I know it sounds strange, but God forbid for his safety, I don't want to see anything happen to him. Your thoughts on that, Kurt?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying I've known Joe Biden my whole life. He traveled with me while we were in Congress. Our kids went to school together. When I lost my election, he called me. So we're not enemies. I've never met Donald Trump. Don't know him. But I can tell you the powers behind Joe Biden and Donald Trump are what I fear the most. And my fear today is that Donald Trump is shaking the system behind what you see publicly to such an extent that they will not allow him to take over the role of the presidency again. And the only way that's going to be stopped is the American people have got to exert their own influence. And again, I'm not anti-Joe Biden. I know him. I like him as a person. But I'm very concerned that what could happen if it continues the way it's going with Donald Trump moving ahead in the polls, especially in the toss-up states, and that's where the focus is going to be, that they will stop him. They'll either stop him by cheating or they'll stop him through some other means. Heaven forbid.
What kind of means?
That could be an assassination.
Wow.
Dan, that's really scary stuff.
In America, it's a terrible thought.
I mean, that's really scary stuff. And with the world today, with Iran probably already nuclear, right? They probably already have the weapon, and they're if not, they're very, very close. And you have these kinds of things happening in our own country. It's a pretty scary time, isn't it, Dan?
God forbid that anything like that would happen. And there have been suggestions that it has happened in our past, that the CIA had links of some sort to the JFK assassination. And we still don't have the records. They have not released the records. The government, the deep state, keeps fighting to not have those records released.
That's a great point.
They even caused Donald J. Trump not to release the records. And it was our CIA director at the time, a former congressman, I forget his name now.
Great
but
point.
He went and he said, please, Mr. President, do not release those records. It would shake up our country if they knew all the information that we have about the JFK assassination. So here we are. We still don't know.
Hold on. Kurt, you're back up to bat. We only have a few minutes.
Well, again, I'm not anti-CIA. Jim Woolsey's a partner of mine and a good friend. He endorsed my book.
Yes.
With a 3-page letter when I wrote my book. And George Bush was CIA director, don't forget. And George Bush did that oral interview that you can see on my website to through 2,000 leaders in Washington saying I'm the kind of example. The former CIA director, President of the United States, said that about me. They get it. It's not those people. It's the people mired in the system. who have other agendas. They want to make money. And look how many retired agency people are multimillionaires. And how did they get that money? Look at that fact.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to ask that question. Those are the questions Congress should be asking.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And Dan, I was going over your bio, and I saw that you were instrumental in breaking the case for the Maryland sniper, the guy that was going around shooting people out of his car. That must have been. How did you break a case like that?
Well, it was crazy. And just to make a long story short, I had made contacts with U.S. Marshals who were heavily involved in the search. And I remember that night coming back to the studio. I was about to go on air 15 minutes before 11 o'clock. And I got a call from one of the U.S. Marshal contacts that I had. He said, write down everything I'm about to tell you. And I said, let me sit down. And I started writing down. He says, this is the tag number of the vehicle we're looking for. And this is the color of the vehicle, the make and model. And these are the names of the two individuals that we're looking for. And this is how we found them. They found them by the credit card that they stole from one of the victims. They had a credit card and they had used it to buy gasoline at a station. And so they traced the usage of that credit card and where it went. And then they got the surveillance video and they saw the individuals and they saw the car. And it turns out, by the way, that they were from Camden, New Jersey, right across from our. And I was, by the way, in Philadelphia. I wasn't even in Maryland when I broke the story. I was in Philadelphia. And I went on. I said to my executive producer, I have to go on the air with the story. I have to go. Are you sure? Are you sure? And he was very nervous. And so sure enough, they put me on the air. I say this, I have so much information that it just blew them away. And I'm amazed even that I was able to get all this information as quickly, 15 minutes before air. And I will never forget this after the break and coming back after the break. And Jim Gardner still asking me questions and grilling me about everything. And then he says, I sure hope your sources are right, because they were looking at all the networks,
and
CNN, Fox. Nobody else had this information. And sure enough, after we got off the
Uncle
air
Barry,
at 11:30, there they go.
Yeah.
And
I
here
told
goes
you,
he's the action.
A news conference is being held in Maryland, and they're announcing the same information I had: the car tag, the vehicles, and everything.
Listen, guys, unfortunately, we have to start to wrap up. I want to make a few comments. I want to thank the both of you for coming in to this studio with Peter and I live. I know the only thing we could afford to pay you is tasty cake and iced teas.
No worries. I just ask for one payment.
Yeah.
Can we all say a prayer for the police officer in Philadelphia who was shot last night in the neck and is fighting for his life right now?
Yes.
He's a 6-year veteran, 31 years old. Let us please offer our prayers to his family and to him.
Yes.
That he pulls through this.
Amen.
Listen, and all I could tell you is you have to promise me, the both of you, we want you back in studio. Okay, I'll do it your way, Quelliar. Come in, Laurel and Hardy, but we both want you. There's too many stories. And to be honest with you, I know our listeners would love to hear from you guys. So in wrapping up, I want to say to Dan Quelliar, to Kurt Weldon, Peter Mimo, Phil on the other side of the glass.
Thanks for listening to Talk Radio 1210 WPHT On Demand.